I think the greatest mystery remaining in Marika's story is this. What did she really do at the Gate of Divinity? Or, much more importantly, what do the writers and developers of Elden Ring want their audience to believe happened at the Gate of Divinity? How do they want their audience to react to what we are shown here? And how does this connect to the larger themes of the story, like the dangers of total power, or the stagnation and decay that results from immortality? What we're going to do in this video is examine Marika's ascendance to godhood, how it is presented to the audience, and figure out what the writers are trying to accomplish. Let's start with, what is the Gate of Divinity? We know for sure that it is the location where Marika became a god. We know this because Ansbach says so pretty explicitly in his dialogue. We also know that Miquella's goal is to perform some sort of secret rite at this same location, that this is where his new age of kindness will begin. We are told that by both Ansbach and Letta and from the description of the secret rite scroll. And that's just about all of the objective information the game tells us about the gate. It's not a lot to work with. We can tell that the writers are presenting this location as something very special and very rare, a site of powerful magic. However, the writers never explain why. Why is the Gate of Divinity so special? Why does it contain this power? Who constructed it, and why did they construct it? And how and when? While we will discuss some possible answers to those questions in this video, something that is important to note is that whenever you are analyzing a story and you come across a question that the narrative does not provide any solid answer for, there are basically two possibilities. The first is that the writers of that story are bad at writing, and they have made a mistake and accidentally left a frustrating plot hole. The second is that the writers left that question unanswered on purpose, maybe because they want their audience to engage with the story in a creative or active way, to use their imagination and reason to come up with their own answers, which is definitely something From Software does a lot of in their games. Or maybe the writers are indicating to the audience which questions actually matter. They don't answer it because getting bogged down in those irrelevant details would distract from whatever they're actually trying to accomplish, whatever theme or emotion or idea or whatever they are trying to communicate to the audience. So I think that the writers of Elden Ring do not explain what exactly the Gate of Divinity is, or exactly how it works, or even exactly what Marika did there, because those questions don't matter. Instead, what really matters, and what they do show us very clearly, are the consequences of what Marika did there. I have said it multiple times in videos now. Elden Ring is a story about power, about who wields power and what they do with that power. With that in mind, the really important question is, what do the events at the Gate of Divinity, or more specifically the consequences of those events, tell us about power? And the answer is, nothing good. Elden Ring was already a story filled with tons of examples of power being used to inflict violence and pain and suffering and death upon the population at a massive scale. Its destructive touch reaches everywhere and everyone. Those who deserve it and those who don't are affected equally. In the base game, we see the misbegotten servants get mistreated at Castle Morn, and then indiscriminately slaughter every single human they can get their hands on in retaliation when they revolt. Even people like Rune, who doesn't seem to have done anything wrong. In that example, we see violence cascade out of control, destroying everything in sight. We see the remnants of terrible battles all across the lands between, where broken husks of former soldiers still wander aimlessly. Battles that devastated the land, that led to nothing but stalemate, that accomplished nothing besides further destruction. But all the while, there's this suggestion that all this suffering is really a result of the shattering of the Elden Ring and the civil war between the demigods that followed. Once upon a time, in the age of the Erd Tree, things were supposedly good here. The Erd Tree was not just a font of incredible power, but of magical healing blessings. As a result of those blessings, the people here lived in golden splendor and whimsy. It seems possible that we could return to that time. If only our player character, the Tarnished, can become Elden Lord, we could set everything right again. Restore the Elden Ring, restore the Golden Order, or maybe even make it better than it was before with one of the mending runes. If that is true, it would suggest that, thematically, maybe power is not so bad after all. Maybe if the right character is in charge, power can be used to make this world a better place. Just like Marika did with the Erdtree back at the beginning of all this, before everything went wrong. And then comes the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion and Marika's new backstory, like a bull in a china shop, to smash those assumptions to pieces. I think that the inclusion of the story of the Gate of Divinity is meant to show the audience that no, everything was broken right from the very first moment. There is no idealized age of innocence for us to return to. This was always a world founded on violence. Power was always corrupt and corrosive. Now, I just made a lot of claims about the thematic purpose of the Gate of Divinity. And going forward for the rest of this video, it is my job to back those claims up with textual evidence. So to begin with, let's take a closer look at the visual design of the Gate of Divinity itself. What are the developers trying to communicate to us through that design? Okay, the gate rests atop the summit of the massive spiraling Belurot Tower. A shining white tower that stretches high up into the sky. I've said before that I think this tower was inspired by the story of the Tower of Babel, which is usually interpreted as a story about the arrogance of mankind, attempting to build a monument that can compete with the brilliance of the heavens themselves. In that story, that arrogant construction is halted when God himself intercedes. In the world of Elden Ring, there was no god there to humble them, so the Hornsent appear to have successfully built a tower that can reach the heavens themselves. And so, the Gate of Divinity is meant to be a very literal gate to heaven. Step through and you might just arrive in paradise. An interesting question is, was the gate already here before Marika showed up? How long has it stood at the summit of the tower? Was Marika the first person to step through its portal? And if not, how many others have done so? Where are those people? Did they ascend to Godhood too? Well, I think we can find the answer to those questions if we can find the answer to another question, which is, what material is the gate composed of? Do the developers want us to believe that this gate is composed of just regular stone, or are we meant to believe that it was built out of something else? Alright, to answer that question, let's start with the imagery in the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer. Looking at the gate as it is being portrayed in this scene, can you see any stone anywhere in this shot? Because I cannot. All I see are corpses. I see a gate built out of a mountain of blood and flesh and viscera. But what about in the game itself? Our player character can reach the Gate of Divinity in the present, and from a distance, it does look like solid stone, right? Well, let's take a closer look to be sure. You can see all of these thousands of corpses that seem to be rising and reaching out of the material that the gate is composed of. And if you zoom in really close, you can see that nearly its entire surface is made up of these imprints of skeletal bodies. This leads me to believe that the intention is that this gate was not built out of stone, but entirely out of petrified corpses. Blood and viscera that was smashed together and then carved up into the shape of a crude gate, and then later turned to stone. It is notable that the gate's visual design is very different than the rest of the surrounding architecture. All of the other stonework around the tower is designed in an ornate, classical, elegant style, whereas the gate is very rough and misshapen. I think that, with these differences in design, the developers are suggesting that the tower and gate were built at different times by different methods with different compositions by different people. The gate was not carved slowly over time by master Hornsent stoneworkers like the rest of the tower. Instead, it was built quickly without any regard for elegance or decoration. The gate's design is purely functional. Some fans have speculated that the tower itself may be composed of corpses as well, because you can find these spots where the columns have begun to collapse or disintegrate, and there are petrified corpses clinging to the sides, though you do not see the same skeletal imprint texture as on the gate. But I'm getting lost in the little details here. It does not really matter if both the tower and the gate are composed of petrified corpses, because the dramatic differences in outward appearance, the elegance versus roughness, still suggest a difference in method and purpose. But let's rewind a bit. Remember, the whole point of this very long digression was to answer the question, do the developers want their audience to believe that this gate was already here when Marika showed up, or do they want us to believe something else? And more importantly, what does that reveal about her characterization? And no, I do not think the gate was already here. You can see in the story trailer that all of these corpses were fresh, recently killed, only recently assembled into this shape. And the only character around is Marika, which means that she must have slaughtered all of these people. She must have arranged their corpses in this shape. There's just no one else here who could be responsible for it. If the developers wanted us to believe otherwise, they would have shown us those other characters, but they don't. They only show us Marika. So she did not co-opt some horn-scent ritual to ascend to godhood. She created her own ritual with her own bare hands. The reason why we have never heard of anyone else ever ascending to godhood at the Gate of Divinity before her is because it did not exist before her, or at least not in this form. There is what appears to be a stone staircase here, so maybe some sort of altar already existed at the summit of the tower, but I can guarantee it did not look like this. The visual design here, the massive petrified corpses, reminds me of something similar in another From Software game. It reminds me of Yahar Ghul, the Unseen Village in Bloodborne. Just like the Gate of Divinity, Yahar Ghul contains thousands of petrified corpses that are climbing the walls as if attempting to escape. All of these people seem to have died in a ritual gone wrong. They seem to have been attempting to ascend to Great One status. The Great Ones are essentially the gods of the Bloodborne universe. And these people did ascend, just not in the way they expected. All of their flesh was instead collected into this nightmarish creature, the One Reborn, a monster made of corpses and viscera. It makes me wonder if the developers intend for us to believe that something similar happened at the Gate of Divinity. Did all of these Hornsent believe they were going to ascend to godhood together, and then something went wrong? Or perhaps they were betrayed and destroyed, the ritual turned against them, and then Marika ascended to godhood alone. But wait. What do we mean when we say that Marika ascended to godhood during this ritual? What does the term godhood actually mean in this setting? No character ever defines it. What is the difference between Marika the mortal or Marika the god? Well, once again, I am going to look at Bloodborne for clues as to how to analyze Elden Ring. As I already mentioned, in Bloodborne there are these beings called Great Ones who might as well be gods. They are beings who possess incredible power, and that is the only difference between them and everyone else. It's just a difference in power. And I believe that this is the only difference between gods and mortals in Elden Ring too. The reason why Marika became a god here is, very simply, because she seized a relic that contained great power. A greater power than anyone else in the setting possesses. And that relic was not the Elden Ring. That's not what we are shown. Instead, we are shown her acquiring something else. But before we discuss that in more detail, we need to talk about Miquella. One of the most confusing aspects of how the Gate of Divinity is being portrayed here is that the ritual Miquella carries out looks so very different than whatever Marika is doing in this trailer. His does not involve any mass death or slaughter or viscera. He passes all the way through to the other side and then has to be called back by Radahn. He divests himself of his flesh, his emotions, his other self, of Saint Trina, of his fate, of his heritage, his great rune, everything that makes Miquella Miquella before passing through. Whereas whatever Marika is doing clearly involves a great deal of blood and death. She only steps up to the threshold and then holds aloft these golden threads. We are never shown her actually passing all the way through the gate, which I think is significant. Unlike Miquella, she has not divested herself of her other self. We know that Radigan is still a part of her all the way into the present. She does not seem to have divested herself of her flesh either. I don't think she has divested herself of anything. I think that the only conclusion we can draw is that the reason why these two rituals look so very different from each other is because they are obviously not the same ritual. The developers are very clearly presenting us with two completely different rituals meant to achieve two completely different results. As the narration in the trailer explicitly states, in this scene, we are witnessing the birth of gold. And what does that mean? Well, I think this refers to the birth not of the entire Elden Ring, but of a new, single Great Rune, a golden Great Rune, which will allow for the beginning of a new Golden Age. To prove my point, we are going to watch the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer together. We are going to break it down piece by piece, line by line, and analyze what the developers and writers are trying to communicate to their audience. To begin, I'm going to play the first 20 or 30 seconds of the trailer. As you watch, pay attention to who is narrating this trailer, and how that changes our understanding of the content. Pay attention to the language used, the imagery. Specifically, notice if there is anything, for lack of a better word, sexual about what we're told and shown in this scene. Okay, here it is.
Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning. The seduction and the betrayal. An affair from which gold arose.
The trailer opens with a black screen and the voice of Needle Knight Letta. This is interesting. Sometimes From Software game cinematics are voiced by unnamed narrators, like the opening cinematic of Elden Ring or the introduction to Dark Souls. Narrators who are apparently omniscient and unbiased. But other times their cinematics are voiced by in-game characters. For example, in the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer, the information we are receiving is limited by Letta's own personal knowledge of the events, and she explicitly tells us where she learned it from. This was told to her by Miquella. So this is fourth-hand information. Letta did not witness these events herself, and neither did Miquella. He was not alive yet. We don't have a clue where he got his information from. As far as we know, Marika is the only character still living who saw what happened at the Gate of Divinity firsthand. So she is the only one who knows the truth. The information we are receiving from Letta is limited and full of gaps. It is being filtered through two different biased and flawed perspectives. The intention of the writers is clear. Not only does the audience not know the full story of what happened here, but the audience cannot know the full truth. We are missing pieces of the puzzle, and we have no means of recovering those pieces. But as I stated earlier, we do know the consequences of what she did, what makes these events meaningful, and that's all that matters. But let's rewind a little. In the story trailer, Letta says, Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning. There is an intentional vagueness in her language here. The beginning of what? Of the Golden Order, of Marika's godhood, of the Erdtree, of the Elden Ring, of Marika's rule over the lands between, of something else? It could be any of these, and all of these, and none of these. But for the sake of this video, I am going to assume that this is simply referring to the beginning of Marika's godhood. Next, we see an image of a human hand wearing golden bracelets, reaching into a bloody, pale mass of flesh and pulling out golden threads. So let's start with those bracelets. What does wearing golden jewelry indicate about a character? Perhaps wealth, or status, or maybe even royalty. My point is, we are not being shown a Marika who is poor or enslaved. Instead, we are being shown a character who already possesses some measure of power and money and influence. Next, the flesh, the blood, that gooey orifice she is sticking her hand inside. There is something distinctly off-putting about this imagery, even kind of horrific. It reminds me of that scene in Silent Hill 2 where the main character shoves his hand into a dripping black hole in the wall. I think in both cases, the animators want the audience to have the same reaction. They want you to feel grossed out. They want you to feel as if there is something sick or disgusting happening here. Even if we don't understand exactly what that something is, we know just from its visual design that it is wrong. And then the hand pulls out these golden threads. These threads do look identical to the threads we see hanging off Marika's hammer way back in the original trailer, when she was shown shattering the Elden Ring. So it is a common belief that these threads are runes, and I agree with that belief. But not the entire Elden Ring. I think it's only one specific rune, but I'll explain that more in a bit. Next, Letta says, the seduction and the betrayal. Once again, the language is extremely vague. Who is seducing or betraying who, and how, and why? Well, let's take a closer look at the imagery in this scene and figure out what the writers are suggesting here. I think there is something explicitly sexual about the imagery and language in this trailer. We hear the word seduction, and then in the next shot, the camera is focused on a woman's bare leg and feet. We hear the word affair, and then we see a shot of a topless woman from behind. Whenever you're analyzing a story, you should pay attention to what the characters are wearing. Clothing is a fantastic and common tool for communicating themes and information to the audience. And I think it is significant that Marika is not wearing very much clothing in this scene. Later, we can find the Hornsent Grandam, who describes Marika as a wanton strumpet. Strumpet is an outdated term that refers to a female prostitute. Again and again, the language of sexual impropriety is used to describe Marika's relationship with the Hornsent and the subsequent birth of the Golden Order. Seduction, affair, strumpet. In this description, Marika resembles the classic archetype of the femme fatale, the fatal beauty, the dangerous woman, who uses her charm and her sexuality to capture, manipulate, and then destroy hapless male characters. I think it is notable that we find statues of Marika throughout the Realm of Shadow, and that those statues are depicted with different body language than those in the lands between. These statues depict Marika with her arms outstretched, as if she is offering something to the viewer, or about to embrace the viewer. It is an expression of warmth or plenty, whereas in the realms between she is depicted with her arms strung up in the air, almost as if she has been crucified. It is a much colder body language. In the changes between these statues, we are seeing a change in character. Once upon a time, to the Hornsent, Marika presented herself as someone who could offer them something, and they wanted it. They wanted her. They were seduced by her. I think it is very likely that Marika was already the vessel of the Elden Ring at this point in the story, or at least an older version of the Elden Ring. But even then, she was not powerful enough to be called a god. Not until she took possession of the Great Golden Arc Rune, the rune which towers above all the others, the true center or spine of the Elden Ring as it exists today. Okay, let me explain. We know that the Elden Ring is modular and changeable. Runes can be removed and runes can be added. We know that the Elden Ring at the time of Farumazula's construction had a different appearance than the Elden Ring of the present. We know that the Rune of Death was removed at some point in the past. Runes are not immortal, not everlasting. Old ones can be destroyed. Miquella apparently shatters his own Great Rune when he discards it, and it seems likely that Ranni's Great Rune has been destroyed too. Both Radon and Melania's runes are infected by scarlet rot. Rykard's great rune is devoured by the immortal serpent, never to be fully recovered. And over the course of the game, 3 new great runes can be born or created. These are the Mending runes, each of which is generated by a different Tarnished, each for different reasons. They are Goldmask's Mending Rune of Perfect Order, the Dung Eater's Mending Rune of the Fell Curse, and Fia's Mending Rune of the Death Prince. The process or method of creation is completely different in each case. Goldmask simply has to contemplate the mysteries of the Golden Order and learn the truth of Radagon's identity. The Dung Eater must be tortured and forced to ingest his own seedbed curses. Fia's is the most elaborate. She must reunite the 2 halves of the Hallowbrand, then lay with Godwyn's body, transferring the strength of champions to his still living corpse. The point is that there is no standard process for creating new runes. The only common element between them all is death. Each of the Tarnished has to die to allow the new rune to be born. That is what is happening in this trailer. It is clearly not the entire Elden Ring. The Elden Ring is made up of a complicated series of concentric overlapping circles, whereas Marika is shown here only holding a single arc of threads. And we even know which rune she gave birth to here. Just look at this image of the Elden Ring from the game's cover art. Do you see anything that resembles the rune Marika was just holding in that trailer? Here, I'll circle it for you. It's right there at the top of the Elden Ring. That's the rune she created at the Gate of Divinity. That is the purpose of her ritual. Going forward, Marika became defined by this rune and its power. That is why her statues changed to resemble its shape. This is the true foundation of her godhood. And there's more. Notice that this rune is made up of 2 parts. There is the arc at the top and then the spine running along the middle. If you look at Marika's scar and sore seals, you can see that her rune includes both of these lines. Now look at the imagery in the trailer again. Marika is clearly holding the arc, but can you see the spine? Well, yes, the spine is Marika's body. I think that the developers are not only showing us the birth of a new great rune here, they are showing us Marika herself being reborn as the spine of that rune. Marika is not just the vessel of the Elden Ring, she is the Elden Ring, at least the most powerful part of it. That is why she is a god and no one else. I discussed back in my video on Godwyn all of the evidence in the game that suggests runes are alive. The fact that the Elden Beast, a clearly living creature, is said to literally be the Elden Ring, and Fia's dialogue, which suggests that her Mending rune is Godwyn's life reborn. Well, now I think that Marika is a rune that has maintained her human form. However, putting all this wild speculation aside, as I said at the very beginning of this video, what happened at the Gate of Divinity is far less important than the consequences of what happened there. And what were the consequences? Well, let's watch just a little more of the story trailer to find out. Here it is.
An affair from which gold arose. And so too was Shadow born. What followed was a war unseen. One that could never be put to song. A purge without grace or honor.
At this moment, Marika gave birth to Gold, or more accurately, her seductive affair with the Hornsent and then betrayal gave birth to Gold. And it also gave birth to Shadow, to darkness, to suffering. What followed was the most brutal and least honorable war in the history of the Lands Between. Mesmer's crusade, a religious genocide, a mass slaughter on a scale never seen before. It is important that the writers are directly tying these two events together. Marika acquires new power in a horrific bloody ritual, and then a new horrific bloody war begins, though the timeline does not seem to line up. As far as I can tell, Mesmer's crusade began quite a long while after the establishment of the Golden Order. But that does not matter. All that matters is that the writers are explicitly connecting these events, regardless of when they actually occurred. I have already explained the thematic implications. In this story, in the world of Elden Ring, the foundations of power are portrayed to be grotesque, gruesome, and vile. The consequences of wielding that gruesome power are devastation and suffering at a massive scale. We see it in the brutality of Mesmer's crusade. We see it in the seemingly endless wars. Marika's Golden Order fought with all its neighbors. The giants, the Carians, the dragons, even against the stars themselves. We see it in the tyrannical nature of the Golden Order, all the suffering it caused. We see it in the devastating civil war between the demigods that followed the shattering of the Elden Ring. In this setting, power destroys. And it all started with a twisted and horrific ritual, with a seduction and betrayal, with Marika committing a terrible sin to acquire a fundamentally corrupt and cursed power. And that is what really happened at the Gate of Divinity. This was originally meant to be a video where I examined all of the remaining mysteries surrounding Marika's story, but I ended up spending so much time discussing the Gate of Divinity that I've decided to just lop it off and post it as its own separate video. Which means that, believe it or not, I still have one more final cleanup video about Marika to write before I can move on. So next time I am going to look at all of the other mysteries that still surround her character. Like, what is the truth about her involvement in the Night of the Black Knives? Or what is her connection to the Guidance of Grace? And what does that reveal about her motivations? So, see you then.